Christian Pulisic, obviously a lock, obviously the most important attacking piece to this group. It's a crazy sentence to say. This is an American player who is clearly the most important attacker for AC Milan for me.
There's no question Pulisic, Tillman, and Weah are locks. I would add Gio Reyna to that. He and Pulisic are I think the best final third playmakers.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Inside American Soccer for episode 2. I'm your host, Tom Bogert, and as always, I'm joined by my friend and one of the greatest players in U.S. soccer history, a veteran of 3 World Cups and a former very successful U.S. U20 World Cup and MLS head coach, Tab Ramos. Tab, it is Thanksgiving week. We are getting into it with the national team. That is our appetizer. I don't need the cranberry sauce right now. I just need talking about Christian Pulisic scoring against Inter Milan and these crazy MLS Cup playoffs with a handful of USMNT guys still alive. But Tab, what's going on? Thanks for joining. As always, great to see you. What do we got going on for Thanksgiving?
Hey, Tom. It's great to be here with you again. Obviously, Thanksgiving week, great family week on the East Coast. This is the time of the year where it's great to be in the East Coast. And very excited about how not just Christian Pulisic, but the rest of our players went back to their teams in Europe and have found some success very quickly.
Yeah, there's some good things happening there, but over stateside, you're right, it is a wonderful week. And when people think about Thanksgiving, a lot of sports come up because it's a fun holiday for American football and NFL. I enjoy that. But Tab, down on the Jersey Shore, I have my own Thanksgiving tradition and Christmas Eve where I rent out a local soccer field and all of some of my former college teammates, club teammates, all these guys. I invited your son. I'll let you know about it as well. But soccer gets in the way for Thanksgiving for me as well.
Yeah, I'm usually, anywhere my son goes, I'm usually the plus one. I think he's actually not going to be in town, unfortunately, the next couple days. But I may show up and just watch from the outside a little bit, see what's going on.
I think you'll bring your shoes and just, you'll find yourself in the middle of the field. I was talking to somebody who played a pickup game with you a few years ago, and they were like, listen, I knew that he was obviously still going to be great, but my God, he was head and shoulders above everybody else on that field. So unsurprisingly, you still got it. On today's show, though, a little bit more important than my Thanksgiving kick around. On today's show, we're focused on the U.S. Men's National Team World Cup roster watch. Everything that happens with this team right now, and it has been for the last year, it's all focused towards 2026, towards that tournament. I think it's important for us early in our show to set the table on where the roster stands and what we think about the whole hierarchy of the club, particularly when we're going to be between November to March in the international windows. There's a lot of big games for players with their clubs, and the final roster is taking shape. There's still plenty of spots up for grabs, but right now I think it is important to give our overview macro look at the position battles and everything to see who is going to be that 26-man roster for Mauricio Pochettino, because a lot can change and a lot will change between now and the summer. We'll talk about our locks. We'll talk about who we think's on the bubble, who we think still maybe has a chance. After that, Tab and I will go with our starting 11s again. I'm very much looking forward to the World Cup starting and imagining who's going to be on the field for the national team. So we'll go to that. Tab is going to give us a story inside the locker room of when he was first working with Tyler Adams with the United States U20 national team. I'm really looking forward to that one. We'll go inside the notebook for a couple of the latest news around the national team and things that kind of impact it in terms of stories that I've broken and things that are going on outside of the field. And finally, we're going to close with our big question, and we're going to look ahead at the World Cup again. Who could be the breakout star of the World Cup? I think Tab and I might have a couple very different answers, but Tab, we got to get into the roster right now. And when you're building a roster, I know that the size is now 26. I forget what your last U20 World Cup squad was in terms of the players on the roster. Was it 23 then, or was the U20 World Cup still 20?
20 for the U20 World Cup. It was
That's
23
tough.
for the Senior World Cup. Yeah, it's difficult, but there are a couple of components that you always start with when you start with these lists, and that's the fact that it's likely you go to the World Cup, you have 3 games in the first round, and they go by quickly. And really the core of your team is who you're playing your World Cup with, right? So it's going to be at most 18 to 20 players that are really going to play a part, regardless of how big your roster is. So I want sort of the listeners to take into account the fact that sometimes we're all battling over those last 5 or 6 positions. Could it be this guy? Could it be that guy? And I think those positions aren't always necessarily about soccer, right? Because you're building a group, You're going to be together for a month and a half, likely between preparation and the World Cup at the very least. And you need, at the end of the day, guys that are going to push each other, right? And sometimes those guys at the end of the roster become really integral parts of these teams, and not necessarily always because of what they do on the field.
That's a good point, and it's funny, like, how difficult it is to come up with a 26-man roster. It's not exclusive to the United States. I'm sure it's even more difficult when you're looking at England, when you're looking at Germany, France, Argentina, some of the heavy favorites going into this World Cup. But 8 years ago when it was 23, I feel like we'd be having the same debates even if they made it a 30-man roster, which FIFA, please don't get any bad ideas. Do not do that. 26 is plenty. 23 was probably plenty, but I'll allow the 26. And yeah, that's a good point to focus on. Like, we will get stuck into the handful of spots on the roster and where we think they might go, but it really is more about the core, 16, 18 guys that we're expecting are going to be carrying the heavy minutes load, and will be the difference between getting to a knockout round or advancing a knockout round, rather than, say, the last handful of spots who might not see the field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what the 26-man roster is, what it does is allows you the opportunity to not doubt at all whether you want to have a third goalkeeper. That's number one. Because believe it or not, it seems simple from the outside, but when you start doing the lineup and then the roster, and in particular, if you have 20, you're thinking, man, do I really need that third goalkeeper? But then if you don't, do you get in trouble, right? So 26 makes it a little bit easier. I think there's nothing wrong with that. I think, if anything, gives a lot more players to live that opportunity. Yeah, you have to remember one thing, in particular, obviously everyone sort of that's tuning in and it wants to be on the inside of these things. I'll move away from the coaching side and take the player side a little bit. What I'll say is, it's difficult to go to a World Cup. It's every 4 years. You have to be in good form at the time. You have to not be injured at the time. So it's very difficult to be on one of these rosters. And this is why it's such a great accomplishment for any player to make it there.
Of course. Before we get into the weeds of this group, of this pool, and kind of sift it down to 26, really quickly, Tab, something that I really liked from Mauricio Pochettino, he had a thoughtful and a human answer when he was asked about the final camp before the World Cup, like those friendlies in May, the send-off friendlies. And he was asked, like, are you going to bring, like, how many extra are you going to bring? And he goes, he's like, I just really want to bring the 26 that are making the World Cup squad, not because I don't believe in other people, but he goes, it's cruel if you bring guys and they're doing all of the preparations for the World Cup, and then the day before we take our flight to Los Angeles, I have to tell 3 people, you're not coming with us, you're not part of the team. He goes, he's like, I think that's cruel. He used that word a few times. In your experience, Tab, when you were playing, what were those, like, send-off camps like? Did you guys have the World Cup roster, or did you have an extra 5 guys that ended up getting cut?
Well, I'll take it from the coaching side first. I think that's most important, because I've done that as a coach. I've taken the extra players, and I think you can do that as long as you have the discussions with the players. I think one of the years my extra player might have been Connor Donovan. Mm-hmm. Another one of the years, it might have been Austin Trusty. And I think in both cases, someone got injured and they replaced him. So, and now we had the advantage that we already had him there and training with us. So it was a really, it was an easy process to incorporate him into the team. I know in one of them, I think it might have been a World Cup in New Zealand. So you're the other side of the world, right? And so you have to take that into consideration, because if you have an injury right before the deadline and you can replace, do you want to bring a player from across the world? So I think it's important to have the conversations. They're not easy ones, but sometimes players, when they feel like they're not on the team at all, they'd rather have that opportunity to be with the team and say, hey, I know I'm not on. In case someone gets injured, I'm here. Mm-hmm. And then that you can replace. So there's a couple different ways to look at. I understand Pochettino's answer, so that you don't have someone who's hopeful, who's not going to make it. But I think if you have that conversation beforehand and say, look, you're not on the team, but I can give you this opportunity to be with the team for a period of time, I think that can also work.
That does make sense, and it is the other side. And at the end of the day, they are professionals, they are adults. But man, like that just seems really difficult. But hey, at least for you, a couple like not happy that anybody got injured, but that eliminated some of those really difficult conversations. But without further ado, let's get into the U.S. national team pool as it stands right now. Late November, the World Cup is coming up in 7 months or whatever. I'm not going to do the quick math. Let's start with the goalkeepers. We're going to go position by position. For me, Matt Freese is a lock, and this position more than any others. If you told me any two of Patrick Schulte, Matt Turner, Chris Brady, Roman Celentano, Zach Steffen, Diego Cochin, Jonathan Klinsmann, pick two, your guess would be better than mine. I have no idea who else Pochettino is going to call, but I think it's inconsequential to an extent because Matt Freese is the starter, and I don't see that changing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I would have to say that obviously Matt Freese has played every game. He hasn't done anything to hurt himself. I think if anything, every game that goes by, he gains a little bit more experience and a little bit more confidence. So I think we're going to be looking at a better goalkeeper even 6 months from now. So the fact that Mauricio Pochettino has sort of made it clear now that this is his guy, I think it's a good sign for Matt Freese, and I think he's done well. From there, I'd have to say, it's likely that Matt Freese, if we look into the future, it's likely that he'll play all the games at the World Cup. That being the case, I think Matt Turner, unless there's some locker room issues that we don't know about, I think Matt Turner's experience at the last World Cup would be important to have on the roster. He did well. He had a good last cycle. He became the starter. And I think he would be, for me at this point, I would add him as a lock. And I would, you're saying, okay, the next two, those are tough ones. I would say, to me, Matt has to be one of those two, and then the other I wouldn't know.
Yeah, so I agree with Turner. It's just that I can't call him a lock in good faith because like Pochettino just left him off the group. I think that he is, for sure, one of the best 3 American men's soccer goalkeepers that we have. His shot stopping, it's a really, really top trait. I know that he struggled a bit. He dipped in form when he went to England, but he's back in MLS, and I think that he's just going to be the guy that we saw in New England rather than the guy we saw struggling at Nottingham Forest. But it's been a tough road for him, and I was, again, if you told me right after the 2022 World Cup, and I'm going to say this line for, I think, about 4 or 5 players as we go down this list, but if you told me after the World Cup in 22, hey, there's no guarantee that Matt Turner will even be on the squad, let alone the starter, I would have been shocked. And I would have said, wow, Gaga Slonina must be really, really good. And that's a name we didn't mention because he's so kind of far away from the pool. The young goalkeeper to watch here is Diego Cochin at Barcelona. He's the starter he's the regular for the second team. He's been with the first team depending on injuries. Like he'll be called up to the bench. That's why he missed the U20 World Cup because there was an injury to Barcelona's, forget if it was Szczesny or Diego Lopez that he had to be called up to be the second or third goalkeeper. He was on the bench for Barcelona, which is really cool. He does not have many first team, if any, games, just friendlies and stuff, but he is playing with the second team, and he's somebody with a big, bright future. So in the general sense, whether it's coaching, would you rather that third goalkeeper slot, again, somebody who's overwhelmingly expected to not see the field, would you rather it be a young rising guy like Diego Cochin, or would you rather it be, like in 2022, Sean Johnson? It could be Celentano, Schulte, Steffen, and then probably Chris Brady might be ahead of Cochin. But generally speaking, would you rather see a young guy or more of like a veteran locker room presence as that third keeper?
I would, and this is a very good question, and I think there are no wrong answers really, because that depends on the coach, purely on the coach and what he wants to see in the locker room. For me, and obviously different scenario because you're talking about U20 World Cups, you're not talking about senior World Cups. Having said that, I always lean to bring as players that potentially were not going to play, as you predict the World Cup going through. I always wanted to have younger guys because that's experience. It's experience. They can watch. They're around. And if Diego Cochin goes into the next 2-3 years as a potential competitor for the position, he will already have that experience under his belt of having been there. So I personally would lean towards a younger player.
Yeah, I would too, particularly with the makeup of again, if it is Freese and Turner. Those are 2 in-prime guys. It's not as if the starter is a young player. You said Turner's already been there, so maybe that third goalkeeper spot can be used on somebody like Cochin, who I think we all believe is likely to be the goalkeeper of the future for this program if his development continues. On to center backs. Chris Richards is the dominant anchor. That is the guy to watch. That is the most important person at this position for me, and one of the most important people on the team. So I want to be focused on Chris Richards, and every decision is based on who partners best with him. We're assuming that this is all built around the 3-4-2-1 system that Pochettino has preferred, particularly in possession. So I'm assuming that 5 center backs have to go. And it depends on if we're going to list Alex Freeman as a center back or as a wing back, because he can do both. And in the last camp, he played that outside center back role against Uruguay, and he was stellar, and he was able to get forward a little bit depending on the team shape. So for me, it's Chris Richards. I think Tim Ream is probably a lock as well. Miles Robinson isn't far off. Mark McKenzie is another likely. Austin Trusty. I think that's a group that I'm assuming if they do bring 5 pure center backs. But there is a possibility that maybe it's 4 plus Alex Freeman and you use his versatility to cover both spots. A couple others to consider. There's Joe Scally, Nokai Banks, Tristan Blackman. And I think those are the 3 that are like actually in the mix to crash the party. But Austin Trusty, I think, is ahead of those guys.
Yep, I would agree with you on that. I would start the rest, and I didn't say this, when we talked about the goalkeepers, because I think with the goalkeepers, it just doesn't matter. But I want to say that we're obviously picking a roster and projecting the future without considering the draw that's happening next week.
Good point.
Right, because that does make a difference. Now we've seen our team against Uruguay and Paraguay, and we've seen what type of combinations, for example, in midfield work out better. We also have seen what we look like against Switzerland and Turkey, European teams. And that's a little bit different. So I think the important part is, when the draw happens next week, I think that could make a coach lean, and those close calls, that could make a coach lean one way or the other. Having said that, I agree with you that I'm looking at the same at 3-4-2-1 because that's what he's playing. Having said that, I think Freeman, Richards, McKenzie, and Ream, I think for me they're locks. If we went by one, obviously Freeman can do both the wing back position. He can also be a right back, or he can be also that straight up center back, because he's done that and he's done that well. Richards is obviously one of the locks to be on the 11 and to play that central position, which is where Pochettino seems to put him. And then I think McKenzie and Ream on the other side could be either one. I think Ream. And we talked about this on the last show about Ream being a little bit of the bridge player because he's the experienced guy that kind of has been Pochettino's guy and has helped on the field and off the field to bring this team together. And I think that role will continue, but probably to a lesser extent as we get closer to the World Cup. And he may just not be a starter by the time we get to the World Cup. But obviously that's all speculation. So I would think those are the locks. I think Miles Robinson has a good possibility to be that other just straight out center back if we wanted to add one more. And then I'll just mention Scally here because I think both Scally and Freeman have that dual role type of that they can do both. So let's say you had, Dest or someone else hurt. Either one of those could replace, Dest on the right side. And then you could also have either one of them play the center back. So they could both be there. So I'll just say that.
My only slight pushback is I don't see a world in which Pochettino would push Scally to that right wing back role, because you have to play like a winger, and he's much more safe as that right center back. I think he's firmly in the mix, but if that happened, I think it would be Freeman or Weah or whoever, and Scally would be further back. But I'm assuming that they're going to bring 5 center backs, and that's not going to include Freeman, just because when we get to the wing backs in a minute, like I just don't think that there's really any other options that you'd rather have an extra wing back than an extra center back. And with Miles Robinson, his biggest benefit to making the roster is you look at Ream, McKenzie, and Trusty. All 3 of them, I think, are excellent players. It is difficult, generally, to find a ball-playing left-footed center back. Well, this group has 3 between those guys. So Miles Robinson is a different profile because of his athleticism and his ability to kind of hunt and win the ball. But he's not the best passer. But that's okay when you have Richards, and then any one of Ream, McKenzie, or Trusty are all very good at passing the ball out of the back. So I think Robinson does have a leg up just because he's different than those guys. But again, Scally, I think, is still firmly in the mix. And then if Noah Banks continues his development, when he was brought in September, I believe, Pochettino was like, he didn't, in so many words, was like, he might not be ready right now, and he probably isn't. But players can develop at his age rapidly, and particularly with the experience he's getting, and we know his talent. We want him in camp, not just for what he's doing on the field and to give him that experience and development, but we want to know more about what he's like, how he fits in the group, what he does off the field, and all of that, because we want to be ready that if he's playing at a level that warrants his inclusion, we know everything about him, or we know more about him because we've had him in camp. So I think that is somebody to watch as like a riser, but maybe Tristan Blackman as well. But again, I think that there are a lot of good options here, and that's another reason why I think Pochettino will bring 5 of these guys that don't include Freeman, because going to the wingbacks is the easiest one for me. It's Serginho Dest, Anthony Robinson, Max Arfton, and then Alex Freeman, depending if you want to put him in this group. I think those 4 are pretty ironclad locks for this group.
Yeah, no doubt, and I think we're all hoping that Anthony Robinson, is back and is back
Exactly.
at the level where he was before. Having said that, Max Arfton, and I mentioned this the other day to somebody, but he somehow made us for a little while forget about Anthony Robinson, and I think that's big words, big compliment to him, because Anthony Robinson to me has been our best player over the last 4 or 5 years. Mm-hmm. He was consistent. He made us better every game. He made big plays every game on both sides of the ball. So I really felt like we couldn't do without him. And yet Max Arfton has made us think about other positions. And I think by not even mentioning that position, I think it's a huge compliment to him. So I agree with you. Those are all locks. And I think we're looking good at that wingback position.
John Tolkien is the only other name I have in the mix here. And I was kind of pouring through potential options. Like, I don't see anybody from the U20 World Cup that just passed that is close enough to really challenging for the World Cup squad. Like, again, Peyton Miller, I think he has a brilliant future. I don't think he's ready to really be called in the mix for this situation. And that's just me trying to figure out, all right, devil's advocate, who could be? If there's an injury, that changes things. You're going to have to find somebody, because going with just 3 wing backs, and while there is versatility, Tim Weah can drop back. There are a number of players who can do different roles. You still would need another kind of natural at that spot, but I don't really see anybody else. And again, this is all assuming health, right? We can't plan for injuries. We can worry about it and try to have contingencies, but I don't think it's particularly fun or exciting to be sitting here. Well, if this person gets hurt, then that happens. Like, I think you cross that bridge when you get there, but we're all assuming health and decent form, at least here, for all of these conversations. So wingbacks, I think, is pretty straightforward. Central midfield is, I think, the most competitive race for roster spots, because there are more deserving players than there will be roster spots available. And this is where we're going to get into the alchemy of building a roster, because do you bring an extra central midfielder or an extra winger or an extra forward? Like, every position is going to need a bare minimum of, X amount of guys. Like, you're not going to bring less than 3 goalkeepers, and you're not going to bring less than 4 center backs. But there are different ways where you could bring an extra midfielder or an extra winger at the sacrifice of another spot. So I'm very curious to see where Pochettino goes there. But for me, this starts with Tyler Adams. Talking about this with center back with Chris Richards. Tyler Adams, Richards, and then Christian Pulisic, I think, are the 3 most important players to this team at the World Cup. And Tyler Adams is, in and of himself, a one-man defensive extinguisher in transition. And it's more about all of these rest of these guys. Okay, who fits best next to Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Tyler Adams is really, I want to say, a little bit of the lungs of the team. That's sort of how he plays. And you're also right about the fact that this is the most competitive position, because you could legitimately pick 6 or 7 players here, and they would all be deserving. It's just a matter of who likes what player for what situation. And this is where, I go back to I think it depends a little bit on the draw and what we get to start, because those are the little differences that could in the end tip the scale for one player or another. I think, center midfield, there's no question for me that obviously Adams, McKinney, and Tesman for me are locks. Tesman is likely for me the best complement to Adams. He's got great feet. And he can also go box to box. You know, we told the story last week about how Tessman can pretty much do everything, and he really can. And I think people are just starting to see the beginning of what he can be. Having said that, we always have to have the respect for Weston McKennie, because Weston McKennie, you know, let's not forget, you know, he's at Juventus. He has started and I think played every minute of every Champions League game so far this year. He's playing big games week in and week out, and obviously the World Cup is big games, and in big games you want big players. Weston McKennie is a big player, and you need him in there. So I think, having said that, those are locks. And then you look at the rest of the equation, right? And that gets difficult, because for me, and I know people are going to disagree with this, but I think all coaches are different. For me, I want to have a guy like Musa in there, and only because he has been a big player. He's still a younger guy. He's at Atalanta. I think he still has a chance to get into that team and to do something big, and more importantly, compete through the winter when some of the MLS players don't have an opportunity to have those competitive games week in and week out. And you know, I'm thinking of myself. I'm in the second round of the World Cup. Somebody gets injured. I have to throw somebody in. I have no concerns about throwing someone like Musa in, and I wouldn't be afraid that the moment is going to be too big, and that has a huge value for me. So I would have to say that for me, he's still one of the guys in there. And then after that, you kind of have to pick, right? You have Roldan, who's a great team guy, and he also has done excellent when he's come in, so he's deserving. Berhalter has done excellent when he's come in, and he's a great, you know, set piece guy and all that stuff. Although I look back at the roster, and he was also in there in the Switzerland game. He was also in there in the South Korea game. So you have to look at the draw in order to decide that. And then you still have Johnny Cardoso. I mean, Johnny Cardoso plays for Atletico Madrid. We can't not notice that. So if he gets into that roster and somehow he becomes a starter there, how can you not consider him, right? He has to be part of the picture. So very crowded in there.
So I want to go a couple point by point here. So you think Tessman is the better fit next to Adams than McKennie? Like his profile and his attributes fit better, particularly in a double pivot?
I do because I think he gives a little bit more offensively, and he can still do the defensive work.
So that's where I'm leaning to as well, because like I think Weston McKennie as like a number 8 in a 4-3-3 makes so much more. It's better for his best qualities than being a double pivot, particularly where Adams, one of like his specialty is defensive transition first and foremost. But when you want to press, if he can just, if somebody can hold the space and he's like freed to like lead a press and go a little bit more aggressive. McKennie is somebody who also is best when he's moving and he's all action. So if you have Tanner Tessman next to Tyler Adams, that frees up Adams. Okay, go hunt for the ball. I'll be covering you. I'll be holding the space. And then also with Tyler Adams, he's got limitations in possession. Tanner Tessman is a better like deep lying playmaker than McKennie. McKennie is better at crashing the box and getting forward, and his intelligence in his runs and timing and motor. I just think that those qualities are better in a 4-3-3 than a 3-4-2-1 where you're a double pivot and you have to be sitting next to a midfielder. So again, I could go both ways because McKennie is so very good, but I think stylistically Tessman would be the better fit, and that comes down to the philosophical argument. Do you want your best 11 players and try to figure it out, or do you want what makes the most sense for the collective, for the group, for the system? And I think that's Tessman in that situation. On Johnny Cardoso, he's the closest in terms of defensive acumen and quality to Tyler Adams. There is no replacement for Tyler Adams. Let me be abundantly clear. Nobody covers the ground that he does. Nobody does what he does on the field. Johnny Cardoso can be that defensive shield in a better way than Tessman. Again, Tessman is a better passer, but that's kind of where I keep coming back to, that Cardoso at Atletico Madrid, if he's ever able to replicate his club form for country, he should be a lock, but he hasn't been because he just hasn't shown that for the United States, and he's been injured as well. So I would put Johnny Cardoso ahead of Yunus Musa because I think that there are less players like Cardoso than like Musa, but Musa was not just a starter at the last World Cup at a young age. He's one of the best players, and he was one of the guys, to your point, Tab, you just felt safe. If you're in trouble, you play it into Musa. It doesn't matter if he's got a defender on him. It doesn't matter if you skip it at his shin. I trust him to bring it down and dribble out of pressure or make the right decision. And he's just become completely lost after that move to AC Milan. And then now he's at Atalanta and not really playing as much as hoped. He's been shuttled out to like a wide midfield role like he was a little bit at Valencia 4 years ago. So it's really confounding given how good we know this player is. He just hasn't shown it at his club.
Yeah, and I think there's also there's one more player that we didn't mention, and that's Aiden Morris, right?
Yes,
Because
yes.
let's not forget that, and this is why we could actually have a show just on the central midfield role here, because I tell you, Aiden Morris, the season he's having at Borough, and what and how difficult that is where he is, and that he week in and week out just sweats it out, in a very difficult championship. I wouldn't count him out either, So like he still plays every week. He still plays hard every week, and he can help defensively. And again, it's a good point you made about the difference between Tessman and McKinney, where obviously Tessman can help you in a lot more ways, in particular when you have the ball. But I also think that that's up to the coach, right? Because there's no wrong there. And it depends on whether we're going to be in a group or we're going to be expected to have the ball more, or we're going to be able to defend more. So that's why I think the draw will be will make up those little differences.
Yeah, again, that is an interesting point that I hadn't really considered of, hey, what will the group stage look like and beyond that. It's just going to be so hard to pick between Berhalter, Roldan, Cardozo, Morris, Musa. Like Sean Zawadzki, I don't really think should be in the mix, and I'm only saying his name because Pochettino keeps calling him up. He keeps on getting injured before the camp, but he continues to be called up. James Sands has gotten a call up. Again, I think that Zawadzki and Sands are so far away, but I don't know. Weird things happen in terms of form, and I think Pochettino has shown he's not afraid to bench conventionally who we think are started. Like, again, it's still crazy that like Musa isn't with the team, or a crazy concept. I think on merit it has been the right decision. Weston McKennie was left out in November, so Pochettino can be a little bit of a wild card. That's why like I'm so careful with like locks, because I think he's shown that he doesn't really care, and it's going to keep changing. But moving forward, attacking midfielders / wingers, we're talking about the 2 line in the 3-4-2-1. Or if they, tweak anything and there's moments where they need to go with 2 proper wingers, there's plenty of options here. Christian Pulisic, obviously a lock, obviously the most important attacking piece to this group. What he does in big moments and the quality in the final third will be a deciding factor to how far this team goes. He is up for it. He's in his prime. He is in insane form with AC Milan. Generally, over the last 2 years, whenever he's available, he's been their best attacker ahead of Portugal's Rafael Leao. It's a crazy sentence to say, and we take for granted this is an American player who is clearly the most important attacker for AC Milan for me. So Christian Pulisic, then Malik Tillman and Tim Weah are also locks. I think that they're going to bring 6 here, Tab, and I believe you agree with me. So I think those 3 are locks, and if Gio Reyna's fit, I think he's probably a lock too, because everything we said last week, that special quality he has. Then pick 2 of Diego Luna, Alejandro Zendejas, Brendan Aronson, and maybe Jack McGlynn.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, I think it depends on the formation. Right now, we're going into this 3-4-2-1, which is what Pochettino is playing. But you also have to think about, when you're a coach, about changing the formation, because that's likely what may happen according to certain results, right? So you may have to go into a more offensive type of setup, and if you go to 3 up top, all of a sudden then you have to have the players for that, and you have to be prepared for that. Having said that, there's no question Pulisic, Tillman, and Weah are locks. You need those guys. All 3 of them can make a difference. I would add Gio Reyna to that for all of the things that we mentioned last week, including that he and Pulisic are I think the best final third playmakers. They can make plays. I think it'll just be a matter of whether, I think on Gio's case, it'll be a matter of whether he is, number one, fit, like, let's just say by fit, let's just say an uninjured during that time. So obviously he makes the team. And the other is, hopefully he gets to play a bunch of games, because he's still at 23. He's still a young player. He needs to play 90-minute games. And unless he can get those 10, 12, 90-minute games between now and the World Cup. I don't see him as a starter here, but I do see him coming in the last 15, 20 minutes and making a difference in games where we're likely going to need a goal. So I think no question a lock. The rest of it is difficult. And you know what you get out of Aronson. It's going to be that hard work, pressing, style that's not necessarily a position you want off the bench, like that's normally a starter that does that and just works for, 70, 80 minutes and then you put somebody else in. So I'm not sure how he fits into that. Zendejas has a lot of quality. The other thing about Zendejas, I think that's a little bit more special is he's really good around the box.
Yes.
He's a good finisher. He has a good understanding of the game. He's smart. Plays for a big club, obviously, under a lot of pressure every week. That makes a difference, too. So I think he's certainly in the picture. And then it would almost be, how can I say it, with Pochettino's trust in Luna and sort of Luna, just like we have Tim Ream being the bridge for the whole team, Luna has been, to me, the bridge between the soft team that we used to have and the harder U.S. team that we've become. So we've gone back to being that hard American team that we used to be in the past. And I think Luna has been the bridge for that.
I like that point. And he's, I believe, him and Arfson and Fries, I think, have been the three most used players in this calendar year. And it's just be hard to see him not being on the roster. And that's another good point of just his mentality. And he has been part of that mentality switch. So, again, I do think that there's going to be 6. We'll get to the full roster very soon. But the last position is center forwards. And I think this is one of the places we have a small disagreement of in that I think Balogun is the only lock because in a World Cup, you're at this position more than any other position. If somebody gets in form, I think Haji Wright and Ricardo Pepi have the inside track. But if between March and May, Patrick Agyemang scores 10 goals in 10 championship games, if Josh Sargent scores 10 goals in 10 championship games, if Brian White starts the 2026 MLS season on fire, they're all within, if Pepi and Wright go cold, I think it's going to be Balogun plus some combination of whoever is in the best form, or if Wright and Pepi are just adequate. But if Agyemang, White, Sargent, or if there's a mystery player to come through here, gets extremely hot, they're going to be on the plane.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, but I just like to have my opinions on the line a little bit more. I'm taking the risk. I'm taking the risk on this. I don't disagree that Agyemang could have a great second half of the season there. However, I don't really see that happening. I just don't. And I'm trying to make the best prediction I can looking into the future now. And I think this is what it's going to look like. I've always been a Josh Sargent fan. And not just that, I had an opportunity to coach him in 2 separate cycles. I brought him up as a younger player, which is unusual for the U20s. I brought him up to play. He actually, there's an interesting thing about Josh Sargent. Josh Sargent played the U20 World Cup before he played the U17 World Cup.
Yes.
So I watched him play in the U17 qualifier, and I remember talking to John Hackworth and saying to John, listen, do you mind if I'm going to take this kid to the U20 World Cup? That's in a couple months. So he's like, no, let me talk to his parents a little bit. So he talked to Josh's parents, and then I called the parents myself, and I was like, I got to take him. He's ready for the U20s. I know he's 16, but he's ready to go. So I do have a soft spot for Josh because he's a very, very smart number 9. So I'm hoping that he can compete for this spot and he still has a chance. But at this point, the other guys are way ahead and likely have a distance that's hard to make up.
Yeah, it seems that Pochettino does not have the same fondness for Sargent. He has gotten called back in when he's been in great form, but that's not always happened, and he didn't have a good showing in September, and he hasn't been back since. But he's, again, we'll see what happens. And again, Pochettino, I don't think that he's that stubborn where he's going to be like, well, I didn't think you were good before. So we'll see. I think that is the openness and competitiveness of this group. So that's all positions. We're going to get to Tab Ramos' 2026 World Cup roster prediction right after a quick break. We will be right back with that, then some Inside the Locker Room stories and much more. Please rate, review, subscribe to Inside American Soccer with Tom Bogert and Tab Ramos, wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back into the show. After going through position by position, all the questions, all the talking points, all of the decisions that Mauricio Pochettino and his staff will have to make in the summer. Tab Ramos here as we sit at the end of November What is your 2026 World Cup squad for the United States?
All right, this is certainly a tough one, but we'll give it a shot. So in goal, I'm going to go with Freeze, Turner, and Schulte. In the back, we're going to have a back three I'm selecting here in the 3-4-2-1. That's most likely scenario. I'm going to go with Miles Robinson and Alex Freeman on the right side, Richards in the middle, McKenzie and Ream on the left side. As a wing backs, Destin Scally on one side, although Scally and Freeman, I think, are interchangeable for me. That's why I put them there. On the opposite side, I have Jedi Robinson and Max Arfston. As central midfielders, I'm going to have Adams, McKinney, Tessman, Musa, and I'm leaning towards Roldan as the other one. As the two withdrawn strikers, let's say winger types, Pulisic, Tillman, Reina, Wea, and I'm going to go with Zendejas and Luna as the other two. And up front, Balogun, Pepe, and Wright.
I think that's a really strong-looking squad, and for me, the ones that tell me if I'm wrong, just by eyeballing it, that would leave the first cuts, air quote, would be Aiden Morris, Austin Trusty, and Patrick Ajamang.
Likely. And Berhalter, right? Berhalter is also fighting for a position.
The first one.
Yeah, and he's right there. So yeah, it's tough.
Cardozo.
I mean, no matter how you look at it, but remember what we talked about at the beginning, right? Likely the last 3 or 4 players on the roster, Pochettino may go with something completely different. I don't know if he goes to Sakarius from the U20s. I don't know if he goes to Brooklyn Reigns or Kramaski or, because these are the things you think about sometimes at the end of the roster. You're building for the future. So, I kind of, we don't know on these, but yeah, it's going to be tough, those final 3 or 4 spots.
Of course, and I'm going to give my starting 11 here. That will change probably 15 times between now and the summer. But Matt Freese in goal, Miles Robinson, Chris Richards, and I'm still going to give it to Tim Ream as a left-sided center back until further notice. Wing backs would be Dest and Arfston, though I keep trying to talk myself into Tim Weah as the right wing back. Dest, I think, is provides too much quality to be left out of that spot. Holding midfielders, I will go Adams and Tessman, as we spoke about earlier. I think that Tessman is the better fit next to Adams. Attacking midfielders, Pulisic and Weah, which means Malik Tillman is a tough luck drop to the bench. Him and Reina, I think, will be appearing in all games, whether they are starting or not. And then up top, it'd be Balogun ahead of Pepe or Wright.
Yeah, I mean, you can't argue with that. That's a strong lineup. That's pretty much the best that we can do. And yeah, I would look forward to seeing that lineup in our first game next June.
I hope praying for no injuries. We've been sitting here always trying to look at the future. All right, remember leading towards 2022 and then even after it was, man, it's going to be Pulisic and Reina and Adams and McKinney and Sargent and Anthony Robinson. And I don't know if those 6 guys started a single game together. So I'm hoping for some better injury luck and some better form to make this all happen, because it was always the elusive when we get our best 11, and then it never happened. And that's how, again, a guy like Brendan Aronson didn't really fit into the best 11 discussions in the past, but he's always been a valuable squad player. He still has a chance to make this roster. He's got like 53 caps because he is always fit. He is always consistent, and you know what he's getting with the work rate. So while we talk about these best 11s, I hope that we get to see that group that we're just naming here. But unfortunately, if recent history is a guide, we might not.
Yeah, it's unlikely, actually. It's unlikely that we'll see that starting 11, but we'd love to see it. Yeah, there are always injuries. That's the difficult part. I think if there's one thing that at this point we have to give Pochettino a lot of credit for, is the fact that he has built depth in this roster, and that I think the team doesn't drop that much no matter who's not in there, right? I would take exception to potentially Adams and Richards. Those 2 spots, really hard to replace. Other than that, and obviously, of course, Pulisic being our best player, but I think can be replaced by what we've seen so far. So yeah, I think a lot of credit to Pochettino and his staff for having built a roster that I think is ready to go.
Let's talk more about Tyler Adams, and we're going to go inside the locker room where Tab tells a story from his playing or coaching days. Today, we're going to stick with the coaching days, and Tyler Adams was a shining star with the New York Red Bulls Academy. When you talk to people around that team, when they were bringing him into the first team, people, if not looking at his baby face at the time as a 16-year-old boy, you'd never know it by the way he played. I remember when he was 16 and he played in a friendly against Chelsea for the Red Bulls, and he, it was very clear. Oh, this is a guy with a really, really big future. So, the U20 World Cup is the proving ground for these best talents within the pool when they're available for selection. So, Tab, tell us about when Tyler was first working with you with the U20 national team.
Yeah, Tyler was a really interesting one because, as I mentioned before about Josh Sargent, jumping an age group and going directly to the U20s, it's not something that happens often because we want players, at least at the time when I was the technical director, we wanted all the youth national players to succeed where they are. It's not just a matter of getting moved up just to get a few minutes here or there. We're only moving up players if the players are actually going to play and be a significant part of that team. I think that's where the value is. And I remember calling Jesse Marsh because I had played, I had watched our U17s play, which at the time were still coached by, I think it was John Hackworth still. And I remember watching Tyler Adams play, and I was like, wow, this kid, he can. It's so easy for him to get around, right? So I called Jesse Marsh. He was the coach at the Red Bulls at the time, and spoke to him about him. And I said, hey, I'm thinking of bringing him up to U20s. What do you think about this? Type thing. And Jesse saying, hey, I don't have any problems throwing him into the pro games here. So I think he's going to be just fine with you. And I was like, okay, well, that's great to hear because I sometimes as a coach, you obviously talk to all the coaches, but you want a little bit of a reassurance from their own clubs because that's at the end of the day, the club coach is who sees the player every day, right? And how hard they work. And so I brought Tyler Adams in a little bit skeptical still, although I wanted to give him a chance because once you move them up, it's hard for a player to get moved back down to their own age group. And so I brought him in, and I remember we had a game at in Carson, right outside the Galaxy Stadium. At the time, it was called the Home Depot Center, right? Yeah. And we have a game there. I forgot who we were playing. It was a scrimmage. It might have been against another country, but it was a scrimmage. And I put Tyler Adams in the first half. And I was like, he's a young kid, but let me just start him anyway and see what happens. If I were to tell you, when we came out at halftime, I gave him the captain's band for the second half. I mean, he just ate up the field. He ate it up. He was telling everybody else what to do. I mean, I thought he would be a little bit shy. He was the furthest from. So, I'm fortunate enough that I've had an opportunity to be around a lot of these players and coach a lot of these players. Tyler is certainly unique. He takes things to the next level, doesn't take no for an answer, and he goes after every ball like he's going to win every one of them. So amazing. The Tyler Adams sort of, I don't want to say finding because I didn't find him, but the decision to bring him up ended up being a really easy one.
And Tab, he's like the same exact way in training, from what I've heard. Is that accurate with when you were coaching him?
He's exactly the same way in training. He's just as hard. I would even debate that eating breakfast, he's the same. He gets there as fast as he can, and everything is full speed. Everything's full speed. Love to have.
He knows one speed.
You love to have these players on your team. Yeah.
And what his, again, it's super interesting to me, at that level as players are developing physically, but they're developing mentally too. And it sounds like at the U20 level, it's difficult to say something like coach on the field, but it seems like Tyler's brain could match how fast his legs move on the ground he covers, which again at that level is pretty rare.
Yeah, no question. And don't forget that sometimes we think, okay, a 23-year-old going to the senior national team has sort of a big step to take, is some veterans around or whatever else. But the difference between, let's say, a 15-year-old and a 19-year-old, it's really big, mentally.
Yeah.
And when he could come into like a under 20 camp and within 5 minutes, start running the show and pointing who needs to go where. I mean, you have someone special there for sure. Yeah.
What a leader, future captain, incredible early career with the Red Bulls and then off to Europe, and now he's at Bournemouth. What a special player he is, and he was awesome at the last World Cup, and hoping for further health for him. While that was an issue previously, and kind of when he went to Leipzig, when he left the Red Bulls, he was fit in form for the World Cup. He was really good, and it's been good on that front since, and hopefully that may continue, and he continues to play all of the minutes he's doing for Bournemouth. What a player. Let's go inside the notebook here with three stories, whether I've broken them or things that you need to know around the national team. The first one isn't directly related to the national team, but I think it is big news and something that will have an impact moving forward. Columbus Crew head coach Wilfried Nancy is going to be named Celtic's new manager. It is interesting to me in a number of ways. One, he firmly deserves it. He's French-born, but he came to Canada when he was a young coach. He was coaching like amateur soccer before he worked his way into Montreal and then to the Columbus Crew. He is a defining manager of this era of Major League Soccer. Aidan Morris credits him with his development. Darlington Nagbe played probably the best soccer of his very, very great career under him. Sawatsky has gotten much better. Sawatsky and Arfston would be nowhere near the picture if not for the development and leap that they took under Wilfried Nancy and everything that they did personally. He's going to go to Celtic. Will he bring anybody with him? Again, I know Aidan Morris wants to work with him again. He is desperate for that. But I would doubt that he'd leave Burrow for Celtic and the money thing there. I think it's going to be interesting. He's somebody that respects the hell out of Major League Soccer because he's worked there. He knows the level. I could see him trying to sign whether it's somebody from Columbus or like he knows the league. So maybe this is going to have a knock-on effect for American or MLS-based players going to Celtic and going to Europe a little bit more. Is also going to have an impact on the American players, domestic players coming out of the Columbus Crew. What do they do with this coaching search? Do they there is no replacing Wilfried Nancy, just straight up. He has been looked at as the best head coach in this league over the last few years. And the way that he empowers and develops players of all ages, he's a one of one. But somebody like Taha Brun is a talented U20 player. Way too soon for him to be talking about this cycle, but for cycles in the future, for the players that they are bringing through their academy into their first team, Wilfried Nancy has been a cheat code for helping develop all these players. Who the next person will be is going to be important for that pipeline continuing in Columbus.
Yeah, and this is a big move, right? To have basically an MLS-bred coach to take a big European club, because at the end of the day, Celtic is a big European club with a lot of pressure. They have to win things. And I know that, the Scottish League is not the most competitive league, but it is a tough league, and they do play big games at Celtic that are important. But this is a great coach. I have the unfortunate story that my last game in MLS was played against him. I was coaching Houston. I was coaching Houston, and our last game was in Montreal to close the season. So after that, Houston didn't renew my contract. But my last game was against Wilfried Nancy in MLS. But having said that, the great thing about this is that he's an excellent coach. I think from all the things that you said, he has the respect. Obviously, it's important when players back a coach, and sometimes it could be just because the coach, puts them on the field, day in and day out. But in this case, I think there's a lot of substance there. He's been a great coach. It wasn't just this year. It wasn't just last year. It wasn't just the year before. I know when I was in the league, that's likely the coach where I looked at what he did and I was like, wow, he just really makes his teams play. However he does it, he's a special coach. And I'm glad to see him get this opportunity. It's not going to be easy because certainly the Scottish Premier League is not MLS. There's always you always need time to adapt, and unfortunately, coach, there's not a whole lot of time that they give you to adapt. But I think he's a great coach, well deserved, and I'm happy to see him go.
Yeah, and he's joining mid-season, which is difficult. And let's just say the Celtic fans don't think MLS is the greatest league in the world. They were linked with their former manager, Ange Postecoglou, and some other big names. And just from some of the things that I've seen on social media, he'll have to win some people over. I have no doubt that he will, because that's the kind of guy he is and the kind of coach he is. But I think that's a super interesting one to keep following moving forward. Second one, well, I'll be quick here. Sebastian Berhalter and Matt Freese are the key kind of U.S. national team pool players that are into the Major League Soccer semifinals. Berhalter and the Vancouver Whitecaps outlasted LAFC. Instant classic game. 2-2 goes into extra time and then penalties. Vancouver were down to 10 men at the start of extra time. a few minutes into extra time, they brought on a center back to replace Tristan Blackman, who got a red card. Well, that center back got injured, then they were out of subs, and they played 25 minutes against Sun Heung-min and LAFC, 9 versus 11, and somehow hung on to get to penalties and won the penalty shootout. Vancouver, I think, are my favorite to get to the final. And Sebastian Berhalter, playing in a Western Conference final, could be MLS Cup. Matt Freese for NYCFC, man of the match in their upset win over the Philadelphia Union. Freese going back to his former club, the Philadelphia Union. He was traded to NYCFC because he wanted a chance to be a starter somewhere, and that turned out to be the best decision and best move of his career because he went from the backup at Philly behind Andre Blake, who is obviously one of the best goalkeepers in MLS history. Freese gets his chance at NYCFC, becomes one of the best goalkeepers in the league, and now the starter for the U.S. national team. Those are two national team players to watch in the Final Four for Major League Soccer. And number 3, we talked about Brendan Aronson a little bit before. Leeds manager Daniel Farke defended Aronson from criticism from fans. Aronson has been criticized a lot by the Leeds fans, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with anything other than the Leeds fans criticize all of their players. It is a difficult place to play. I've spoken to enough people there. They're a very passionate fan base. Farke said, quote, Brendan represents so many skills that we want to stand for at Leeds United. He works his socks off. He gives everything. He's relentless. He leaves his shirt on the pitch. It's more than unfair criticism at the moment. I like seeing the head coach coming out and saying that, but that means it's pretty bad around the group if he feels the need to come out and talk about that. Brendan has 2 goal contributions and 800 Premier League minutes. His underlying creativity numbers are in line with a good to decent attacking midfielder in the Premier League, which is a really high bar. So what have you made of Brendan Aronson's time at Leeds?
I think for me, it's been really positive. I think we likely know Aronson a lot better than the Leeds fans. But that's what you get. I'm not sure what the expectations are going to be for him, but obviously what the coach is saying of him leaving everything on the field day in and day out. I'm sure he does the same in practice. And I think, sometimes the fans don't see that value, right? All they see is that their team is in the relegation zone right now, and they have to blame somebody. And obviously the foreign players are the first to be blamed, and it all goes in line, right? It all goes in line. So, okay, so we're not doing well. Who do we blame? And that's where the blame goes. But, anytime I've seen Aronson play for Leeds, he always leaves a good impression with me. Obviously, he works as hard as he can and he makes the team better. So I think it's a little bit unfair, but at the end of the day, obviously it's the EPL. It's the toughest league in the world, and you're supposed to win games. And when you don't, you're going to take blame.
I think that Brendan Aronson had a couple unfair circumstances. The price tag, it's not his fault that they paid a lot of money for him, and probably a little bit too much given if he went to a Bundesliga team, it would not have been that same fee. But also, they billed him as a number 10, and I think that created unfair expectations of the style that he plays. If they called him a number 8 or something more that he wasn't expected to be leading the team in creation and popping up with more goals, which, again, that's not his game. He's great at a lot of things. He's not a traditional number 10. He's more of a modern all-action number 8. I think that would have helped him a little bit in terms of the fan reaction. But it's time for a quick break. We'll be right back with our big question of the week. Who will be this breakout star at the World Cup? Welcome back into Inside American Soccer. Before we close out the show, we want to tackle one big question this week. And that is, looking at the World Cup, we just gave you our roster. We just gave you our starting 11s. Now it's time to give you who we think is going to be the breakout star for the United States at the 2026 World Cup. Tab, let me start with you.
Well, there was a couple different ways to look at this, to answer this question. And when we look at breakout stars, my question was going to be, are we looking at someone that we, as a breakout star, someone that we just don't really know yet that's going to break into, the team and play an important part for us? Or are we looking at one of our players who's already there who could potentially become like a world star after this? And I went the latter. Because I think I'm looking at Flo Balogun right now, and I'm thinking I'm going to bank on the U.S. team having a very good run at the World Cup, and I'm not jumping on the bandwagon because we beat Uruguay, a team that had won 3 out of the last 18 games. It was a huge win. It was a huge win. But I'm jumping on the bandwagon that the players are just working hard right now, and we're going to get better and better. And because of that, I'm thinking that we're going to have a good World Cup. And if we are, we're going to need our number 1 to be great. And I think if our number 9 is great, and if Flo Balogun has the type of World Cup that I think he can have, he will become a world superstar.
I really like that answer. I think that that is all possible for him. And where he's at with Monaco right now, he's steadied his form and showing, like, again, he had an injury last year, a little bit of difficulties at first. This is a player that the move to Monaco, it was more about, I'm going to go there for a few years, and this is a great platform, a good team to be in, first and foremost, but also a good platform to go to the Premier League or go to another Champions League club, another move up, because I think that he's got another level to hit. So Balogun doing that at a World Cup, that's the best shop window in world football. And if he scores goals, as we both expect him to, then that will fast track that next potential move. And I do think that he could play at, just about the highest level in Europe if he does reach his potential. So Balogun is a very interesting answer. I agree with you, Tab. There are different ways to take this. I am also choosing to focus on the latter of, at a home World Cup, I care more about the next stratosphere that our best players are going to reach or could reach. This is such a boring answer, and I apologize in advance. It's Christian Pulisic for me. Because, yes, he's already broken out at a long time ago. Then at the 22 World Cup, I thought he was good. He's killing it for AC Milan. That's huge. There is nothing bigger for a soccer fan in this country than being a World Cup star. Doing so on home soil, Christian Pulisic will vault into another stratosphere, I think, in the way that he's viewed, not just among American soccer fans, but global soccer fans. If he stars at the World Cup like I think that he will, I will steal this. I believe this was from Tony Meola. He said he was talking to Pulisic and said, more or less, how do you think your life is going to change? And he goes, I don't think it's going to change at all with the home World Cup. And to his credit, he's established himself. He's not going to be a different player today than he will be in July. But Tony laughed and said, literally everything's going to change. You don't understand. Everything is going to change. So I think that high-end possibility is more than anything else.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, that's a good shout, actually, to pick Christian, because he at the end of the day is our number 10. The number 10s always have the best shot at being the best player, right? And certainly he has that opportunity. And I'd love to see it, because we've been watching Christian since he's 12 years old do wonders around the fields here on the East Coast, and there would be nothing better than to have him become, not that he's not a world superstar, but to be right at the elite level of where the best players of the world are.
And you think of, in terms of American soccer fans or American sports fans, everybody knows who Tab Ramos is. Everybody knows who Landon Donovan is. Everybody kind of knows who Clint Dempsey is. That mainstream appeal, that mainstream crossover to the American soccer fans who come with loud voice and passion and support at the World Cup, they don't know that he just scored against Inter Milan in the biggest match in Italy, right? But if he scores against Wales at the 26th World Cup or Denmark or anybody, they're going to know that. They're going to remember that. And those are the moments that transcend not just soccer fans, but to stardom in this country for just the general sports fan. And I think Christian Pulisic will reach that this summer. Speaking of reaching conclusions, that's the end of our show here. The second episode of Inside American Soccer. Thank you all so much for listening. Please rate, review, and subscribe. The World Cup draw is coming up this week already. It's happening. Next week. It's happening. It's coming. We're going to have something around that show. We're going to figure out the timing, but we're going to be here when we learn who the group is for the United States at the 2026 World Cup. I hope everybody listening has a wonderful Thanksgiving, some good holidays, get some good food in you, and get to see some family and friends and all. And we'll be back with you next week.